Alright, this is going to be our final lecture for you guys in Bio 1409. This is going to be sort of a conservation summary. And the first thing that you're supposed to do in this chapter is define what a population is. So we defined this the first time back in 1408, the first half of the course. It's all the members of one species in one place at one time. We talked about how, like, when you drive into a city, it tells you the population of that city, and it's only telling you how many people are in that city. It's not telling you how many oak trees are in the city or how many penicillium spores are in that city. It's just telling you about one species. So that's what a population is. Population ecology studies how a population interacts with the environment over time. Okay, next up, you have a little blurb on exponential growth. You already have the definition and thing all written down for you guys. If you've been paying any attention to COVID-19, you will have noticed what an exponential growth curve looks like. I told you to doodle, and this is what I want you to doodle after the little definition. It's what's known as a J-shaped curve. What happens during exponential growth is that whatever the generation time is for that organism, the population doubles after that generation time. So for like E. coli, they can regenerate after every 20 minutes. So every 20 minutes, the population can double. For human beings, our generation time is more like 20 years. And so every 20 years, our population has the ability to double. And so this is what would happen if we were to just allow ourselves to reproduce and not worry about death and not worry about how much food is available, not worry about how many parasites are around. This isn't sustainable in the long term, but it is something that happens in populations like bacteria when we grow them in the lab, or COVID-19, the brand new virus that has never existed before and nobody has any immunity for it. It has grown exponentially in every place that it's been introduced to. Limiting factors are things that decrease the chance that that exponential growth can actually happen. It's what makes life more realistic. So eventually a population is going to run out of food, members are going to start to starve to death, reproductive rates are going to start to drop, and so that would level the population off over time. Same with water availability. The other thing you have to think about is most organisms, they have a specific place where they want to lay eggs if they're egg layers or raise their babies. There's territory that they have to defend. That decreases if there's more animals in the population or more plants, if we can talk about plant competition as well. And then disease passes through populations more quickly when there's more members of that population. Like if we were still at, let's say, 18th century human population levels, COVID-19 might not have ever made it out of China. But because people exist everywhere and we travel to lots of places, that disease was able to leave China and go to Italy and Spain and Portugal and the United States and Africa and South America and all these other places too. And it's because everywhere you look, there's people all over the place. Next, you have the definition already for logistic growth curve, and I've told you to doodle. This time you're doodling this curve off down here. This is what's known as an S-shaped curve. So what happens during logistic growth is you get exponential growth at first, but eventually things start to level off at what's known as carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is how many individuals the land can support with all the food and water and nest sites and all of that stuff that the organism needs. So for example, in this picture, all of these seals are on this one particular island, and their population had been kept in check through hunting, but eventually hunting got banned, and so the population exploded. But then it started to level off around 10,000 breeding male fur seals on that island, and what kept them in check was the amount of space actually on the island. So breeding decreased because there weren't enough breeding sites for everybody to raise their young and have their sex and do all of their little stuff, and so that's what helped them level off eventually on that island. One of the things you need to be able to do is recognize the difference between exponential growth and logistic growth. So remember, exponential just keeps going up. It keeps doubling. You end up with that J-shaped curve. There is a formula to help you calculate that. I'm never going to ask you to calculate exponential growth, but exponential growth does not factor in carrying capacity, which is how many organisms the land can actually support. That's where logistic growth comes in, and then we level off around that carrying capacity. Next, it says explain the concept of carrying capacity. It's everything that I have been talking about, essentially. So, we have hunting here in Texas, and you are allowed to hunt a certain number of deer every single year, and one of the reasons that we do that is because we have removed all of the large predators from Texas. We used to have wolves, we extirpated them. We used to have bears, we extirpated them. There's coyotes, but coyotes can't really take down a full-grown deer unless it's really sick. And so there was nothing to keep these prey items in check until starvation came around and disease came around. Now I chose this picture because it makes it look like this animal is starving to death. However, it has a disease known as chronic wasting disease. That disease can explode through the population more quickly when the animals end up being packed in a more limited area. If you are a hunter, you should have heard of chronic wasting disease. It is a disease that at this point we do not believe can be transmitted to people. However, it's a disease that is caused by the same type of organism that mad cow disease was, and that, it turned out, could be transmitted to people. And so make sure you're always careful if you're a hunter. Next, explain what happened to the population of humans over time is the next thing that you guys have. So this is our growth curve. If you look at it, does it look more like exponential or does it look more like logistic? And at this point, it looks more like an exponential growth curve. We've got that J-shaped curve where our population has been exploding over time. Now, you have blanks that you're supposed to be filling in here, and I have tried to make it easier for you to do that by making what you're putting in the blank a different color. So advancements in medicine are one of the reasons that we have had this exponential growth. We have had antibiotics that have allowed us to survive infections that used to kill us. Things like tuberculosis, things like Legionnaire's disease, things like syphilis. Those used to kill a lot of people, but antibiotics has reduced that mortality rate. Also, when we don't have our poop water mixing with our drink water, we don't get diseases like polio and cholera, and so we survive longer because we have better sanitation as well. So this is the Duggar family. They have had, or have, I really don't know if they're still on the air, a show that it used to be called 18 and Counting. I don't know how many kids they have at this point. But sort of the question that I want you to ask yourselves is, can everybody on the planet just go ahead and have 18 to 20 kids because they want to have a big family? And what I need you to understand is, no, you cannot all just go have 18 to 20 kids for yourself, because that leads to a population explosion and something will cut people down at some point, whether it's a disease that comes through the population like COVID-19, or it's we run out of food so people start to starve to death, or because people are starving to death or don't have access to water, more wars start out and so people die in that. We can't just all have as many babies as we possibly want, because the earth can't support a population that is that large. Now there's a lot of debate about how many people the earth actually can support, and we don't really know for sure. They used to think only like 1 million people could fit on the planet, and we're already up to 7.5 billion people. So clearly those people were wrong. But right now we're not getting resources to all of the people that need them. So we're already having problems with people not having access to things that they need access to. And we could fix that if everybody didn't have large family sizes like this. All right, still going with that population size for just a second. One of the other things that has slowed our growth curve is education. When women are more educated, they choose to have fewer babies over time, and so that slows down our population growth. So that's another thing that has helped us out. Ecological footprint. So you already have the first part of this, but then it says in 2003 the ecological footprint was 2.23 hectares. So this is what you're filling in after that. Based on them having divided up all the arable land that is on the planet, plus the number of people that are already out there, plus all the resources that we already take, we have already exceeded the amount of land available. So we already can't meet everybody's needs that are on the planet if you do the math that's associated with that. We can do things like start to grow plants in more greenhouses over more stories. So you're growing more plant material to feed people with in a smaller area, but you do still have to have resources available for that. So we have to change something somehow is the moral of the story there. This is a big issue that people don't think about because we have decent access to water. But if you've lived in Texas for as long as I have, then you know there have been years where they told you stop watering your lawn. They do that so that we'll have more drinking water available, so that they don't have to tell you, sorry, you don't get water to your house on Tuesdays and Thursdays because we just don't have enough water to send to all the places all the time. There are already places in the United States where there are houses that do not have water because there's not enough water available for the people that live in those places. The Central Valley in California is one of those places. There's whole towns that don't have water because they've depleted all the water sources in that area. And so I know it's something that you don't think is going to happen, but the people who moved to the valley in California didn't think it would happen to them either, and now they have houses they can't sell because there's no water that goes to those houses. All right, This is an assignment that I am going to ask you guys to do. Some of the questions that are on the Chapter 36 assignment that is either at the back of your notes or I'm going to upload it. I'm not sure where it is for you guys. But you're going to go to this website right here. It's free for you guys to use. You're going to run through a bunch of questions. And then at the end, it's going to tell you how you're doing in terms of your personal ecological footprint. This was my data from last year. I actually did worse this year when I redid this in a class just recently. But based on this year that I made this presentation, my Earth Overshoot Day was May 1st, which means I used all of the resources that were available for me for the whole year of 2019 by May 1st of that year. So I consume more material than the Earth can actually provide for me. If everyone on the planet lived like me, we would need 3 Earths to supply everybody with all the food, the resources, especially the gas. After you start clicking into it and you look at things in a little bit more detail, it breaks down where a lot of your information from your ecological footprint actually is coming from. Like, I don't fish, and so I have a very teeny tiny sliver for fishing grounds. This is how much grazing land it takes to supply me with my food and how much cropland. I don't eat a ton of meat, but I do eat meat. Probably 6 days a week I eat meat. Forest products, I have a house. That house needed to have wood to build that house, plus I do stuff with wood like construction-y sort of things. And so what this shows you over on this side is most of my footprint comes from mobility. And in fact, most of that came from me driving up to Fort Worth from where I live 2 times a week. If I didn't have to do that, like I don't right now, I haven't had to fill up my car since this whole quarantine thing started. So if I were to recalculate this now based on how I'm living now, all of this information would change. What I want you to do, though, is answer all the questions for yourself, and what I ask you for on the quiz at the back is what is your Earth Overshoot Day, and then what is your ecological footprint, and you can find that, like it gives it to you on a separate page, and so that is my ecological footprint in hectares. Make sure you go do that and then figure out how are you doing from an earth-friendly sort of a standpoint. All right. Skipping past that and that and that. The next thing that you have is why should we be concerned about the current loss of biodiversity? I've already filled in most of what you need again, so there should just be some things for you. Here you go. Those are the 2 words that you're going to need to fill in the blanks. So, the Rivet Popper hypothesis. If you ever have been in an airplane and you've looked at the wing of the airplane, all of these little things, they're called rivets, and they're holding the metal of the wing down to the structure that's underneath it. If you were to look out at that wing and one of those rivets popped out as you were taking off, it's probably not a big deal. Your wing is still going to stay intact and life is good, but the thing is, the 2 rivets that are on either side of that, they start to get stressed because that one failed. That makes them more likely to fail. The same thing happens in the real world. Like if I come back to this tiger right here, if we were to lose tigers, which they are a critically endangered species, not only do we lose them, but that puts stress in other places. Like maybe the prey items that they had been consuming start to overgrow, and so they start to consume more of the resources that they were supposed to, and so we start to lose out on other things as well. So essentially, there can be a chain reaction. That's kind of what the Rivet Popper hypothesis is saying. Okay. Next up, you guys already have everything you need on the back part of that, so I just wanted to show you this video.
In Peru, along the base of the Andes Mountains, lies the Manu Biosphere Reserve. Covering about 4.5 million acres, it's the largest and most undisturbed tropical rainforest in the world. Here, more species of plants and animals are protected than in almost any other place on Earth. Around 1,000 species of bird, 300 kinds of trees, and countless other forms of life called Manu home. They rely on each other and the resources of this land to survive. Living organisms thrive in the biome because conditions for life are ideal. The climate is wet, the temperature is warm, and the sunlight provides constant energy. Trees grow tall here and form a canopy that collects energy from the sun. As a result, most of the food for plant-eating animals grows far above the ground. To find food, animals must fly, leap, swing, and climb to get the food they need. Zoologist Dr. Carol Mitchell has been studying monkeys in the Manu rainforest for 12 years. For 2 of those years, she followed a troop of about 70 squirrel monkeys. She learned how they gather food and where they fit into the larger food web.
I actually had always wanted to study monkeys, and I was always intrigued by tropical forests. And in tropical forests, you find the greatest diversity of animal species.
She quickly discovered that squirrel monkeys don't work alone. Instead, they get the nutrients they need by associating with another species, the capuchin monkey.
Capuchins are the only animal which can open up the initial part of the pollen cluster. And the squirrel monkeys hang around underneath and pick up nuts which are half eaten by the capuchins.
It's a smart strategy. Palm nuts enhance their diet by giving them an important source of oil and calories. Squirrel monkeys consume a richer variety of food by scavenging around the capuchins. During her time with the squirrel monkeys, Dr. Mitchell determined their place in the intricate ecology of the rainforest.
I'm going to pause that there because that hit the highlights of what I wanted it to say. So the moral of the story here is, let's say that, and I always forget how she says it, capuchin. I'm used to hearing capuchin, so sorry. But if the capuchins were to go extinct, then the problem with that is all the animals that had been relying on them opening up the palm cluster, they wouldn't have any food sources because only the capuchins were actually strong enough to be able to open that. And so if you lose one thing, it puts stress on other things that are out there. All right, extirpation is loss from an area of a species. I'm showing you this little video for a couple reasons. One, it kind of gets your attention, but this is a horny toad. It's actually a lizard. It's not an amphibian at all. One of their defense strategies is what you're seeing here. When they get threatened by dogs, they like to squirt blood out of their eyes, and I guess it freaks dogs out enough that the dogs don't try to eat them at that point. But you don't find them in our area. They used to be so common that kids would like collect horny toads and they'd get a nickel each by taking them to somebody in town. But now you can't. And the reason you can't find them in our area anymore is twofold. One, they've lost a lot of their habitat, and two, they eat these large red ants that they like have a hole in the middle of a circle that is completely cleared of all vegetative material. And the horny toads would just kind of sit out there and then pick the ants off a little bit at a time. Well, when fire ants came in, fire ants put stress on the big red ant, and fire ants can actually swarm a horny toad and kill the toad. And so they were being outcompeted, essentially, was what was happening there. And so they were extirpated from our area. They're not extinct yet, but you can't find them in our area anymore. Extinction does mean gone forever, and so this is an elephant bird. It's an example of something that has gone extinct. Passenger pigeons are from North America. They have gone extinct. Passenger pigeons are extinct because we hunted them to the point of extinction. We used to think there were so many of them there wouldn't possibly be a way that we could kill them all, and yet we killed them all. Provide some examples to show how we are losing species diversity. So in the previous chapters we talked about how we're losing amphibians due to that chytrid fungus. Rhinos are being poached for their horns, which their horns are just made out of keratin. It's the same thing as your fingernails, and yet people think it can cure cancer, and so they go and they kill the rhino and then just cut off the horn so they can sell it, usually to Asian markets. Elephants, it's a tusk thing. Tusks are the same thing as a tooth, but they think, again, it kind of has magical powers and it can cure numerous diseases as well. This is a pangolin. Pangolins are actually mammals. Their scales are made out of the same keratin that rhino horn is, and once again, people think that they can cure any number of different diseases. This is one of, to me, the most troubling pictures in the world, and I know it's hard to tell what's going on, but each one of those bags contains numerous scales from pangolins. So this picture represents thousands of pangolins that had to be poached and killed and then plucked of all of their scales to supply the Asian markets with the pangolin scales that they believe were going to cure their impotence or whatever they think it's going to do for them. This is considered to be the most poached animal on the planet, And it's all for those scales that don't even do anything based on evidence that we have at this point. And so it's really a shame that we'll kill something that has no point to be killed. There was no reason that that many of them needed to die. So remember, you're getting the words that are in red to fill in your blanks there. Okay, threats to biodiversity. I'm going to warn you, I don't know which slide it's on, but I have a very disturbing picture coming up at some point. So I'm just going to warn you at this point, so expect it. The number one threat to biodiversity, which can cause the loss of species, is habitat loss. I don't know if any of you ever drive farther south, but there is a road, I think it's 171, it's either 171 or 174, that goes between Burleson and Joshua. And that road used to be just ranch land and a little bit of farmland. And if you drive down that road now, it's got stoplights all over it, and it looks more like this. So an area that used to be able to support coyotes and mountain lions and all these different kinds of plants and animals, now it's just people and dogs and cats that live inside of there. And so all of the things that used to live in there, they either got hit by a car or they got shipped off in some other way. Number two thing that hurts species. So the example that I gave you earlier that relates to invasive species were those red imported fire ants, what normal people just call fire ants. And so they hurt the horny toad that lives in our area. Well, another example is a bird called a brown-headed cowbird. They are something that's known as a nest parasite, which means the moms are so lazy they don't make their own nest. Instead, they look for another mom who's built a nest, they kick some of her eggs out, and then they lay their eggs in her nest so that this other mom will raise her babies because she's a crappy mom. They will do that to birds that live in our area, like this is a golden-cheeked warbler, and they used to be on the endangered species list, and part of the reason why was the brown-headed cowbird. Plants can be invasive species too. In our area, there's a bunch of invasive species, but the ones that tend to promote the strongest response from people is arundo, which is something that's kind of like a bamboo. We also have something that's called salt cedar that can grow around our area. This is kudzu. You find this farther east, and it can actually grow over trees and then suffocate them of sunlight so that the trees can't do photosynthesis anymore, and it can end up killing them. Snakes in Guam. So Guam is an island out in the Pacific Ocean. We have a military base there. On one of the shipments to the military base, some of these snakes snuck onto either the plane or the ship that was going out there, and they got onto the island. Well, this island had a bunch of different bird species, but there were no predators on the island, so these birds didn't have any idea how to deal with predators, and then the snake showed up. The snake looks like it's small, but it can eat the eggs of these birds, and it wiped out numerous species on that island, even to the point that some of them went extinct, all because of this invasive species that we accidentally brought in when we brought some stuff over. I'm not going to show that one. Overharvesting. So there are things where we are legally allowed to take them. This is cod. The Atlantic cod fishery essentially collapsed a couple of decades ago, and it was because we overharvested them. The Pacific cod fishery was still doing okay until fairly recently, and climate change has really started to hurt that side too, but they've shut off the cod fishery in the hopes that the population could rebound. So depending on who's monitoring the situation, it might be able to recover, but it might not. It just depends on what's going on there. I mentioned earlier the passenger pigeon. This is the last passenger pigeon that was ever around. Her name was Martha. She was at a zoo, but we overharvested them to the point where they're extinct now. Oh, there's the gross picture. Sad picture. Poaching is another one. So poaching is different from overharvesting. Overharvesting, it's legal for you to take animals, but you took more than you were supposed to. Poaching, it's illegal for you to take that animal, and you still took it anyway. And this is what happens in a lot of places. Even in the United States, you'll see signs about anti-poaching things. But people that are now weaponized in Africa, they do some very intense poaching where they look for rhinos. In fact, killing the guards that protect the rhinos. Like, their guards are soldiers that are designed to shoot any poachers that come nearby, and they have a lot of weapons at their disposal, and yet a lot of them get killed trying to protect the animals because they care about the animals. Here, the poachers, which they are very often trying to sell the product to so they can sell drugs or get more weapons, they chainsawed off the face of this elephant just so they could get the tusks and then just left because they had what they wanted, so none of the rest of this mattered. This is meat that could have fed people. It was a smart elephant that maybe had a kid or was the kid of a mother, and elephants do have very strong familial bonds, and they do mourn the loss of the people that are in their group, the elephants that are in their group. So this hurts elephants in a whole bunch of different ways. Now, on this side, one of the other issues that comes along with poaching relates back to the COVID-19 thing that is happening for us right now. There are a lot of species out there that are closely enough related to us that if we decide to eat them, some of the diseases that they may have carried can be transmitted to us. It is believed that HIV jumped from primates like a chimp or a gorilla into humans because a person was poaching those animals, and as they were butchering them, the blood of a monkey that was infected with simian immunodeficiency virus, which is related to HIV, got into the hunter, and then it mutated just enough that it became HIV in that person. And so we shouldn't be eating things that are closely related to us because they might spread disease. Again, at this point, we're not really sure how COVID-19 jumped into people. There's some evidence that maybe it was bats, and there's some evidence that maybe it was the pangolin, that scaled mammal that I showed you guys earlier. But there are things we shouldn't be eating, and if you do, you're taking life into your own hands when you do that. Last, climate change is a very big one. You and all other plants and animals are adapted for a specific set of climatic conditions, and if the climate changes, well, animals have the ability to get up and move and try to go to places where things are better, unless there isn't a place that's better. So if you think about the polar bear, it lives in a place that is super cold at the very north of our planet. As climate shifts, colder places would be shifting farther north, but they were already as far north as you can go. So there's literally nowhere for a polar bear to go and be able to survive. So this was a National Geographic photographer. He found this polar bear that is quite literally starving to death. It is against the law to feed wild animals, especially polar bears, because they don't like people and they will eat you like you are their own personal favorite prey item. So they literally watched this polar bear starve to death because they couldn't feed it and it couldn't find food for itself. And it couldn't find food because there was no snow or ice for it to hunt on. And so there was just nothing available for it. And so climate change is very much already hurting animals on this planet. Whether you want to believe in climate change or not, it happens, and animals are already suffering as a result of it happening. Oh, yay, that's almost done. All right, next up, you got a little blurb on the ozone layer. If you were alive in the 80s, you heard a lot about the ozone layer. You don't hear about it so much anymore. So in the 80s, we loved our hairspray. And our hairspray came in these aerosol containers, and the propellant that spit the hairspray out was CFCs. CFCs were chlorofluorocarbons. What we found is those chlorofluorocarbons that were in things like hairspray would go up and mix with ozone, which is 3 oxygen atoms bonded together. And then it would take those out of commission. So it created this hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica. We banned CFCs. They haven't been used since the 80s. And the ozone layer has been recovering, but it's important that you know there is still a hole there. So it is still in the process of recovering from the damage that we did to it decades ago at this point. I've already given you guys your definitions for biological magnification, so I don't think there's anything on that slide for you guys to get written down. This one is just sort of an FYI as related to biological magnification. So this whale washed up, and after they pumped the contents of the stomach, they found a ton of plastic inside of that. As you go up a food chain, essentially what happens is toxins, or garbage in this case, accumulate to higher levels in larger animals, or just, again, as you travel up higher in the food chain. So if you were to find a turtle, it would have several pieces of plastic, but this is a bigger animal, so it has even more plastic that's in here. This is another one of those important moral lessons for you. Try not to use plastic bags. Things in the ocean confuse those plastic bags for jellyfish, and jellyfish are prey items for a bunch of things that live in the ocean. This is another one of those what humans do to screw with the world sort of a thing. I don't know if any of you have seen this video, but this was a drinking straw that got stuck in the nostril of this sea turtle, and they pulled it out, and you can see it was very unhappy about all of that. It is bleeding from the nasal cavity. This is one of the reasons why there was a big push a couple of years ago to stop using single-use plastic drinking straws. It's because of things like this. They do at this point make wood straws, bamboo straws, glass straws, metal straws, or, you know, you have lips and glasses work. You don't need a straw anyway, so stop doing it for animals like this that are out there. All right. Those were your current events, by the way, and I guess I kind of should have said that as we went through there. So your current events, more mercury and more fish. If you are a pregnant woman, you should be avoiding fish because of the mercury levels that are in there. The whole plastic thing that I mentioned earlier and the plastic straw thing, those are your currents. All right. Based on current evidence, how is the climate of the planet changing? So we know a couple of things for sure. Number one, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been increasing since the Industrial Revolution. Number two, other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide, their concentrations are increasing. We know, based on past records, that if carbon dioxide levels increase in the atmosphere, temperature on the planet increases as well. Even during times where the temperature increased first and then CO2 increased, the CO2 increasing then made the temperature increase even faster. And so we know for a fact carbon dioxide levels impacts the temperature on the planet. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they got a Nobel Prize back in 2000 and, oh gosh, I don't think it was the same year they wrote the report. I thought it was a couple of years later. Does that say? That doesn't really say. But their conclusion, based on a lot of evidence, not just CO2 and temperature, but biology of organisms, the chemistry of the ocean, a lot of different bodies of evidence supports the idea of climate change. Okay, so this GIF always takes just a second to load, but what it's going to show you is what happens to the average temperature from when we first started to record temperature back in the late 1800s to today. And what I want you to notice is, yes, temperature does fluctuate. However, since the 1800s, temperature has very clearly been increasing on the planet over time. So the average temperature on Earth has been getting warmer since the Industrial Revolution. Okay. For your based on current evidence, at the very end, I've given you again most of it, but it says the increase in energy in the atmosphere makes. This is one of the things it does. It makes storms more intense. I don't know how many of you remember Hurricane Katrina. That was a very intense hurricane that wiped out a large chunk of New Orleans and then came around and did damage in Texas as well. I believe that this picture was taken from Superstorm Sandy. Superstorm Sandy caused loss of life and massive flooding, and those storms had more energy in them because as temperature increases, the amount of energy in the atmosphere increases. So wind, which includes hurricanes, tornadoes, monsoons, those all get more intense as the climate temperature specifically increases. Let's see, the things that we need to do, we have actually been doing a lot of because of COVID-19. Our stay-at-home policy, you can go online and look, we have cleaned the air in a lot of cities that had some of it, excuse me, I had a hiccup, the most polluted air that's out there. Like, look at Los Angeles in December of last year versus March of this year, and you will see the air quality is significantly better now than it was back then. Same with China. When they completely shut down the, Hubei province, their air quality got significantly better as a result of them not burning fossil fuels anymore. And so, if nothing else, stopping the burning of those things makes our air quality better. How are biomes going to change over time? So generally speaking, I'm just talking about northern hemisphere there. Southern hemisphere does the opposite. But biomes are going to start to shift north. Like we're currently in a temperate grassland. That temperate grassland is going to start to travel farther north and end up in like South Dakota, North Dakota, and Canada. And the forests that had been there are going to move farther north. And we're going to end up with a different biome where we are. So things tend to shift towards the north. Now what this picture is showing you is a glacier from South America, and they've been taking pictures of it for a very long time. And notice that glacier is nearly gone. There's just a tiny little bit of it that's left at this point. And so on a personal America note, we have a park in Montana that's called Glacier National Park. Not too long in the future, Glacier National Park won't have any glaciers left in it because of climate change. A lot of animals are shifting farther north. So the armadillo used to be like the quintessential Texas mammal, and now you can find them up in Kansas and Nebraska. What has happened to wildfire seasons in recent years? They are lasting longer, the fires are burning hotter and more intensely. I don't know how well you guys remember from a couple of years ago, there was the Camp Fire out in California that burned the entire town of Paradise off the face of the earth. This was Paradise in this picture, or at least part of Paradise. And so fires are just hotter. If you paid any attention to the news in January, Australia essentially burnt to the ground. Now, one of the scary things about that is ordinarily, so Australia is in summer when we're in winter and vice versa. So whenever Australia was having a wildfire season, we could loan them, and Canada could loan them, some of our firefighters to help them fight fires. Well, now because the wildfire season is longer, we can't, because we're still fighting fires here at the time that they're fighting fires, and so we end up not having enough personnel to deal with all the fires that are happening at any given time. So climate change has made fires work, period. How can climate change affect animals? Well, some of them can move farther north, but remember, not all of them can do that like the polar bear. Will all organisms suffer? No. In fact, the ones that are most annoying for people seem to be doing great. Mosquitoes are moving farther up mountains, and they're moving farther up north in the northern hemisphere and farther south in the southern hemisphere, and they're taking their diseases with them. You can now find malaria and dengue and chikungunya in more places than you used to be able to find them in. This person had dengue fever. It is a viral infection that is transmitted by mosquitoes. What's extra scary about dengue is, unlike most viruses, like if you get the, what is a good one for me to show you? If you get polio, you get your polio, your immune system takes care of it, and then you don't have your polio, although you're stuck with the paralysis you developed during polio, but you get better. Here in dengue, if you get it, you get better, but then if you get it again, the second infection is more likely to kill you. And that's not how typical infections work, but that is how dengue works. And so watch out for mosquitoes as they spread to new places. What is ecotourism? It's essentially going to a place specifically to try to help their environment and paying money to do that. One of the classic examples of that is panda bear tourism, where people will go to China and pay lots of money to go see a panda bear. And then the money that they spent goes back into helping to breed and feed the panda bears in that exhibit. And so that's a type of ecotourism. Restoration ecology tries to repair things that we have broken. After that, there's an assignment at the back of the chapter. Make sure you answer all those questions. You can scan that and upload it to Blackboard, or just complete it on a Word document and then fill it in that way.